Going to Meet the Man. Chapter 1. The sun beating down on a small town in the American Deep South. The year is 1963, a period marked by intense struggle and transformation as the civil rights movement sweeps across the United States. Description of the American Deep South during the civil rights movement. The town is a patchwork of neatly kept white neighborhoods and dilapidated black quarters, divided by both physical and invisible lines of segregation. Large, ancient oak trees line the streets, their branches heavy with Spanish moss, casting dappled shadows that seem to hold the weight of history. Storefronts display Confederate flags, and whites-only signs are still prevalent, a stark reminder of the entrenched racism that governs daily life. The atmosphere is tense, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. News of marches, protests, and violent clashes from nearby cities buzzes through the town, carried on the static of radios and whispered conversations. The local diner, a gathering spot for the town's white residents, is abuzz with nervous speculation and thinly veiled hostility. In the midst of this charged environment is Jesse, a white deputy sheriff in his mid-30s. Jesse is a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face hardened by years of enforcing the law as he sees fit. His uniform, crisp and spotless, contrasts with his weathered face, etched with lines of stress and sun exposure. Jesse's eyes, a cold blue, survey the town with a mixture of authority and suppressed frustration. His badge gleams on his chest, a symbol of his power and the burden he carries. Known for his firm stance against the civil rights activists, Jesse sees himself as a protector of order and tradition, a mindset deeply rooted in his upbringing. The town's black residents live in a constant state of fear and resilience, organizing in secret and whispering of freedom and equality. They gather in churches and homes, planning marches and sit-ins, determined to challenge the oppressive status quo. Jesse's role often places him at the center of these conflicts. He patrols the streets with a vigilance that borders on paranoia, always on the lookout for any signs of rebellion. The tension between maintaining his authority and the growing demand for civil rights creates a volatile atmosphere. Against this backdrop, Jesse's personal and professional life begins to unravel, leading him to confront a chilling childhood memory that will force him to re-examine the foundations of his beliefs and his own humanity. As the story unfolds, the layers of Jesse's character are peeled back, revealing the complex interplay of power, fear, and the deep-seated roots of racial violence. Chapter 2. The night is oppressively hot, the air thick and unmoving, offering no respite from the day's scorching sun. Crickets chirp relentlessly outside the open window, their song a stark contrast to the silence inside the bedroom. Jesse lies on his back, staring up at the dark ceiling, his mind racing. The clock on the nightstand ticks loudly, each second dragging on, amplifying his insomnia. Jesse lying in bed, unable to sleep. Jesse tosses and turns, his body unable to find comfort on the worn mattress. Sweat beads on his forehead and trickles down his temples, soaking into his pillow. He tries to focus on the rhythmic sound of his breathing, but memories and anxieties flood his mind, refusing to let him rest. His thoughts drift to the events of the day, a routine patrol disrupted by a tense standoff with a group of young black activists, their faces defiant and filled with a determination that unsettles him. Beside him, Grace lies still, her back turned towards him. The space between them feels like a chasm, filled with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Jesse glances at her, the curve of her shoulder barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. They haven't spoken much lately, their conversations stilted and perfunctory. The stress of his job and the increasing strain of the civil rights unrest have created a barrier between them. Grace shifts slightly, letting out a soft sigh, but remains asleep. Jesse knows she senses his turmoil, but neither of them knows how to bridge the growing divide. Her concern and disappointment weigh heavily on him, adding to his sleeplessness. She disapproves of his harsh methods, and the moral conflict between his duty and her compassionate views has become a constant source of friction in their marriage. Jesse's body aches, a constant reminder of the physical and emotional toll his job takes on him. His muscles are tight with tension, his back sore from hours of patrol. The weariness seeps into his bones, making him feel older than his years. He rubs a hand over his face, the stubble on his chin rough against his palm. The images of the day replay in his mind, the faces of the protesters, the anger in their eyes, the defiance in their voices. He thinks of Big Jim, a towering figure among the activists, whose gaze seemed to pierce right through him. Jesse feels a pang of unease, knowing that the confrontation is far from over. The weight of his badge feels heavier than ever, a symbol of authority that brings him no peace. The lines between right and wrong blur in the haze of his thoughts, and the childhood memory that haunts him begins to surface, adding to his disquiet. As the night stretches on, Jesse realizes that sleep will not come easily, and with it, neither will the answers he so desperately seeks. Chapter 3. Young Jesse is an 8-year-old boy, full of curiosity and admiration for the world around him. He lives in the same small southern town, but to him, it's a place of wonder and discovery. Jesse's family is a traditional one. His father, Roy, is a stern yet charismatic figure, a respected sheriff whose presence commands respect and fear in equal measure. His mother, Margaret, is a quiet, dutiful woman who tends to the home and ensures that Jesse is well-mannered and disciplined. Jesse idolizes his father. Roy is everything Jesse aspires to be: strong, authoritative, and unwavering in his convictions. He watches his father with wide eyes, absorbing his every word and action, eager to emulate the man he believes to be a hero. The town is a microcosm of the Deep South's segregated society. Whites and blacks live in distinctly separate areas, a line drawn as clearly in Jesse's mind as it is on the town map. The white part of town boasts neat houses with well-kept lawns, while the black neighborhoods, unseen by young Jesse except in passing, are characterized by dilapidated homes and unpaved streets. Schools, churches, and even drinking fountains are segregated, a fact of life that Jesse has never questioned. It's the way things have always been, as natural to him as the changing seasons. The town's social hierarchy is rigid and unforgiving, maintained by an unspoken agreement among the white residents and enforced by men like Jesse's father. Jesse's understanding of race is shaped by the attitudes and behaviors of those around him. He hears the casual slurs, the whispered judgments, and sees the way his father and other white men in the community interact with black residents with a mixture of condescension and barely concealed hostility. Roy is a man of few words, but his actions speak volumes. He is a pillar of the community, someone who upholds the law and maintains order. To young Jesse, his father's job is noble and important, a testament to his strength and integrity. Jesse often accompanies Roy on his rounds, riding in the passenger seat of the patrol car, feeling a swell of pride as they drive through the town. Roy is often greeted with respect by other white townsfolk, who see him as a protector of their way of life. His interactions with the black community, however, are starkly different. Jesse notices how his father's demeanor changes, becoming colder and more authoritarian. It's a duality that Jesse doesn't fully understand but accepts as part of the natural order. One evening, Roy takes Jesse aside and speaks to him in a serious tone. He tells Jesse that as he grows up, he will need to be strong to understand the responsibilities that come with being a man in their world. Jesse listens intently, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's respect and to live up to the expectations placed upon him. Chapter 4. As Jesse lies in bed, struggling to sleep, the memories of that fateful day come flooding back. He recalls it vividly, a hot afternoon when he was just 8 years old. His father, Roy, had come home early, his expression serious and unreadable. "Come on, boy," Roy had said, his tone stern but not without a trace of paternal pride. "There's something you need to see." Curiosity and a sense of duty propelled young Jesse to follow his father. They walked through the familiar streets of their small town, the weight of the day pressing down on them both. Jesse didn't know what to expect, but the gravity in his father's voice made him eager to prove his bravery. Vivid description of the public event, the atmosphere, and the crowd's reactions. They arrived at the town square, which was unusually crowded. The air buzzed with a disturbing energy, a mix of excitement and dark anticipation. People milled about, chatting in low tones, their faces alight with a perverse sense of occasion. Jesse felt a shiver run down his spine as he took in the scene. In the center of the square stood a hastily constructed gallows. The sight of it made Jesse's stomach churn, a sense of unease settling deep within him. The sun beat down relentlessly, intensifying the already stifling heat. The crowd's mood was jubilant yet sinister, a chilling celebration of the violence about to unfold. Men, women, and even children were present, their expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to overt excitement. The town's black residents were nowhere to be seen, hidden away in their homes, their absence a silent testament to their terror and oppression. As Jesse and his father moved closer to the front of the crowd, he saw the condemned man, a young black man, barely more than a boy himself. His eyes were wide with fear, his body trembling. The rope around his neck seemed like a cruel, inevitable end, and Jesse couldn't tear his eyes away. The psychological impact on young Jesse witnessing such violence. The crowd's reactions were visceral. Some shouted jeers and insults, their faces contorted with hatred. Others stood in silence, their eyes cold and unfeeling. Jesse felt a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, fear, and a sickening fascination. He clung to his father's side, seeking comfort but finding none. As the executioner tightened the noose and the trapdoor beneath the young man's feet was released, Jesse felt his heart lurch. The man's body jerked violently, then hung limp, swaying slightly in the hot breeze. The crowd erupted in a cheer, a horrific roar of approval that echoed in Jesse's ears. The image burned itself into Jesse's mind. The lifeless body, the ecstatic crowd, and the overwhelming sense of injustice all melded together in a traumatic tableau that he would carry with him forever. The event planted seeds of confusion and doubt in his young heart, conflicting with the teachings of his father and the values of his community. Roy stood tall and unflinching, his eyes fixed on the scene with a steely resolve. He placed a firm hand on Jesse's shoulder, squeezing it tightly as if to impart some unspoken lesson. "This is what happens, son," Roy said, his voice a low, emotionless rumble. "This is how we keep order. Remember this." Jesse looked up at his father, trying to reconcile the man he idolized with the brutality he had just witnessed. Roy's expression was hard, his eyes devoid of sympathy. To him, this was justice, a necessary act to maintain the status quo. The event ended, and the crowd began to disperse, their bloodlust sated. Jesse and his father walked home in silence, the gravity of what he had seen weighing heavily on his young mind. That night, and many nights thereafter, Jesse lay awake, haunted by the image of the lynching, the cheers of the crowd, and the cold, unyielding words of his father. Chapter 5. In the years since that haunting childhood memory, Jesse has followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a deputy sheriff in the same small southern town. The civil rights movement has gained momentum, and the town is no longer the quiet, segregated place of his youth. Protests, sit-ins, and marches are becoming more frequent, and Jesse finds himself on the front lines, tasked with maintaining order and upholding the law. The protesters are relentless in their pursuit of equality, their voices rising in unison against the injustices they face daily. Jesse's superiors expect him to quell these demonstrations, using whatever means necessary. The once clear-cut lines of duty and morality are now blurred, leaving Jesse in a constant state of inner turmoil. His interactions with black protesters, including a key figure, Big Jim. Among the protesters, one figure stands out: Big Jim. A towering man with a commanding presence, Big Jim is a leader within the black community. He is charismatic and articulate, his speeches stirring the hearts of those who yearn for change. Big Jim's defiance and courage make him a thorn in the side of the local authorities, and by extension, in Jesse's. Jesse's interactions with Big Jim are fraught with tension. On one hand, Jesse sees him as a troublemaker, a disruptor of the peace. On the other hand, there is something about Big Jim's unwavering resolve and the justness of his cause that stirs a disquieting sense of respect within Jesse. During one particularly heated protest, Jesse finds himself face to face with Big Jim. The crowd is chanting, their voices a powerful wave of determination. Jesse orders them to disperse, his voice firm but cracking with underlying uncertainty. Big Jim steps forward, his eyes locking onto Jesse's. "You can't keep us down forever, Jesse," Big Jim says, his voice a deep, resonant boom. "We're fighting for our right to live as equals. Can't you see that?" Jesse's grip on his baton tightens, but he can't bring himself to strike. The words hang in the air, echoing in his mind. The crowd watches the exchange, the tension palpable. The encounter with Big Jim leaves Jesse deeply unsettled. He returns home that night, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The rigid beliefs instilled in him by his father clash with the growing awareness of the protesters' humanity and their rightful demands for justice. Jesse begins to question the foundations of his upbringing. The memory of the lynching surfaces again, this time accompanied by a sense of shame and regret. He remembers the look in the young man's eyes, the fear and helplessness, and he sees the same look in the eyes of the protesters he now confronts daily. At work, Jesse's colleagues are quick to dismiss the protesters, labeling them as agitators and criminals. But Jesse can't shake the feeling that there is more to their struggle. He starts to see the parallels between their fight and the injustice he witnessed as a child. The lines between right and wrong, once so clear, are now shrouded in a murky haze. Grace notices the change in him. She watches as he becomes more withdrawn, more introspective. One evening, she confronts him, her voice gentle but firm. "Jesse, what's going on with you? You're not the same man I married." Jesse looks at her, his eyes filled with turmoil. "I don't know, Grace. Everything's changing, and I'm not sure what to believe anymore." Grace takes his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "You have to find your own way, Jesse. Listen to your heart, not just what you've been told all your life. Jesse nods, but the path forward is unclear. He knows he can't continue to turn a blind eye to the injustice around him, but challenging the status quo feels like an insurmountable task. As the protests continue and the pressure mounts, Jesse finds himself at a crossroads, forced to confront his deepest fears and question the very essence of his identity. The internal conflict rages on, a battle between his ingrained prejudices and the burgeoning sense of empathy and understanding. Jesse realizes that the choices he makes in the coming days will define not only his future but also his very soul. The echoes of his father's teachings and the cries for justice intertwine, creating a cacophony that he must navigate to find his own truth. Chapter 5. Jesse sits on the porch late at night, the coolness of the evening air a welcome respite from the sweltering days. The porch light casts a dim glow, illuminating his furrowed brow and troubled eyes. He takes a deep drag from his cigarette, watching the smoke curl into the night sky, lost in thought. The memory of his father looms large in his mind. Roy was a man of unyielding principles, a product of his time and environment. Jesse recalls the countless lessons imparted to him, the strict discipline, and the unwavering belief in the racial hierarchy that governed their lives. Roy's words echo in his ears, "This is how we keep order." Jesse had revered his father, internalizing his values and striving to live up to his expectations. But now, as an adult, Jesse feels the heavy weight of those teachings. The world around him is changing, challenging the very foundation of his beliefs. He grapples with the realization that his father's legacy is one of oppression and violence, a bitter pill that he struggles to swallow. The lynching, once a symbol of justice in his young mind, now stands as a stark reminder of the brutality and inhumanity that his father perpetuated. As Jesse reflects, his mind drifts to flashbacks of his childhood, seamlessly intertwining with present-day events. He remembers standing beside his father at the lynching, the horrific scenes seared into his memory. The crowd's cheers, the lifeless body, and his father's stern face all come rushing back. The parallels to his current situation are undeniable. In the present, Jesse faces another protest. He stands at the edge of the crowd, baton in hand, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. The protesters chant for justice, their voices a powerful, unified force. Jesse's eyes meet those of a young black woman holding a sign that reads, "Equality Now." Her gaze is fierce, determined, and it pierces through him, much like the eyes of the young man at the lynching. Jesse's mind flashes back to another moment from his childhood, walking through the black neighborhood with his father. He remembers the fear and resentment in the eyes of the black residents, the same emotions he now sees in the protesters. These flashbacks intensify his internal conflict, blurring the lines between past and present, right and wrong. The struggle between his duty as a law enforcer and his recognition of the protesters' humanity. Jesse's role as a deputy sheriff demands that he maintain order, a duty that often puts him at odds with the civil rights protesters. Each day, he is faced with decisions that test his moral compass. The tension between his professional responsibilities and his growing empathy for the protesters creates a chasm within him. One afternoon, Jesse is called to disperse a peaceful sit-in at a local diner. The protesters, mostly young black students, sit quietly at the counter, their silent defiance a powerful statement against segregation. As Jesse approaches, he feels the weight of his badge, the symbol of his authority, pressing heavily on his chest. "Move along now," he orders, trying to muster the authority his father would have shown. But his voice lacks conviction, and the students hold their ground. A young man, perhaps the same age as Jesse when he witnessed the lynching, looks up at him. "We're not causing any harm, sir. We just want to be treated equally." Jesse hesitates, his baton feeling like a lead weight in his hand. He sees the humanity in the young man's eyes, the same humanity he once saw snuffed out in the town square. The lines between duty and justice blur further, and Jesse is torn. In his quiet moments, Jesse confides in Grace, seeking solace and clarity. "I don't know what to do, Grace. Everything I was taught feels wrong now. But if I go against my duties, what kind of man am I?" Grace, ever the voice of compassion, takes his hand. "You have to find your own way, Jesse. You can uphold the law without losing your humanity. Listen to your heart." Jesse nods, but the path ahead is fraught with uncertainty. He knows he must make a choice: continue to enforce laws that perpetuate injustice or stand up for what he increasingly recognizes as the true moral ground. His struggle with his conscience becomes a crucible, forging a new understanding of himself and the world around him. As the civil rights movement intensifies, so does Jesse's internal battle. He begins to see the protesters not as adversaries but as individuals fighting for the same dignity and respect that he once believed his father stood for. The journey to reconcile his past with the present and to find his place in a rapidly changing world is a painful yet necessary evolution for Jesse. The choices he makes in the coming days will define not only his career but also the man he will become. Chapter 6. The tension in the town has reached a boiling point. Protests have grown more frequent and more fervent, drawing national attention. The local authorities, desperate to reassert control, have made several arrests, including that of Big Jim. The arrest of such a prominent figure is a significant victory for the sheriff's department, but it also means the stakes have never been higher. Jesse is tasked with interrogating Big Jim, a responsibility that fills him with dread. He knows this is a critical moment, not just for maintaining order but also for his own moral reckoning. The interrogation room is stark and claustrophobic, the air heavy with anticipation. Big Jim sits handcuffed to the metal table, his broad shoulders hunched yet defiant. His eyes, dark and penetrating, follow Jesse as he enters the room. Jesse's footsteps echo in the small space, each step amplifying the tension between them. The intensity of the moment and the power dynamics at play. Jesse takes a seat across from Big Jim, their eyes locking in a silent battle of wills. The power dynamics are clear: Jesse, the authority figure with the power to dictate Big Jim's fate, and Big Jim, the symbol of resistance, unwavering in his stance. "Big Jim," Jesse begins, his voice attempting to maintain an air of authority. "We need to talk about your involvement in these protests." Big Jim's gaze doesn't falter. "My name is James, Deputy. And we're not just talking about protests. We're talking about our right to live as free men." The intensity of the moment is palpable. Jesse feels the weight of his badge, the symbol of his authority, but also the burden of his internal conflict. He can sense Big Jim's unspoken challenge to see beyond the roles they have been assigned and recognize each other's humanity. Jesse leans forward, trying to assert control. "You're stirring up trouble, James. These protests are illegal, and people are getting hurt." "People are getting hurt because of the system you uphold," Big Jim retorts, his voice calm but forceful. "We're fighting for our lives, Jesse. For our dignity. Can't you see that?" Jesse's internal battle, with memories of the lynching resurfacing. As Big Jim speaks, Jesse's mind is a whirlwind of memories and emotions. He recalls the lynching he witnessed as a child, the horrifying event that was meant to teach him about order and control. The image of the young man hanging lifeless, the crowd's cheers, and his father's cold approval resurface with haunting clarity. Jesse's hands tremble slightly as he tries to maintain his composure. He is caught between the legacy of his father's beliefs and the undeniable truth of Big Jim's words. The faces of the protesters, their pleas for justice, echo in his mind, challenging everything he was taught to believe. "Why do you keep fighting?" Jesse asks, his voice softer, almost pleading. "Don't you see the danger you're putting yourself in?" Big Jim leans forward, his eyes intense. "We fight because we have no other choice. Because the alternative is to live in chains. You think this is just about protests? This is about our children, our future. Can you look at your own children and say you wouldn't fight for their freedom?" Jesse's resolve wavers. He thinks of his own family, of Grace's compassion and the future he wants for his children. The internal battle rages on, tearing at his conscience. He remembers his father's words, the justification for violence and control, but they feel hollow against the stark reality of Big Jim's conviction. The interrogation room seems to close in around him, the air thick with the weight of history and the pressing need for change. Jesse feels the crushing pressure of his position, the expectations of his peers, and the moral imperative to do what is right. In this moment, Jesse realizes that the choice he makes will define him. He can continue to uphold a system built on oppression, or he can acknowledge the humanity and justice in Big Jim's fight. The path forward is fraught with peril, but it is a path that might lead to redemption, both for him and for the community he serves. Jesse takes a deep breath, his decision forming in the silence. The confrontation with Big Jim has pushed him to the edge, forcing him to confront the deepest parts of his soul. The climax of their encounter is not just a test of wills but a crucible in which Jesse must forge a new understanding of justice, duty, and humanity. Chapter 7. The interrogation with Big Jim leaves Jesse deeply shaken. He can't return to his duties with the same sense of purpose. Every protest he breaks up, every young face he confronts, haunts him with the question, "What am I really fighting against?" His nights are sleepless, his mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. One evening, after another tense day of confrontations, Jesse sits alone in his living room. The house is quiet, the shadows long and oppressive. He feels a growing sense of isolation, the walls closing in as the weight of his actions presses down on him. He pours himself a drink, hoping to numb the turmoil, but the alcohol only sharpens his introspection. Jesse's thoughts drift back to his childhood, to the lessons his father imparted, and to the day of the lynching. He sees it all with a clarity that pierces through the fog of years. The young black man's eyes, filled with terror, the crowd's bloodlust, and his father's unyielding face. These memories, once a source of twisted pride, now fill him with revulsion. He realizes that the hatred and violence he has perpetuated are not just actions he performs but are deeply ingrained in his identity. They are the inheritance of a legacy built on oppression and fear. He sees how this legacy has shaped him, how it has turned him into an instrument of that same oppression. Jesse's epiphany comes with a crushing weight. He sees the hatred not just in his actions, but in his thoughts, in the way he has viewed the black community, and in the justifications he has made for his behavior. This hatred was not born of his own volition but was planted and nurtured by his father and the society around him. The unsettling acknowledgement of his humanity and his role in perpetuating violence. Jesse's realization is both painful and liberating. He sees himself not just as a product of his upbringing but as an individual with the capacity for change. He understands that acknowledging his role in perpetuating violence is the first step toward redemption. It is an unsettling acknowledgement, one that forces him to confront the darkest parts of his soul. He thinks about the protesters, about Big Jim, and about the future he wants for his children. The faces of the young black students at the diner, their quiet dignity in the face of oppression, come back to him. He realizes that their fight is not against him personally, but against the system he represents. A system he no longer wishes to support. Jesse knows that change will not come easily. It will mean standing up against his colleagues, risking his career, and possibly even his safety. But he also knows that he cannot continue to live with the burden of his actions. He cannot look his children in the eye, knowing he is complicit in a system that denies others their humanity. In the quiet of his living room, Jesse makes a decision. He will no longer be a pawn in the machinery of oppression. He will find a way to support the fight for equality, even if it means standing alone. He feels a sense of clarity, a lightness that comes from embracing his humanity, flawed though it may be. This epiphany is not the end of Jesse's journey, but the beginning of a new path. A path that acknowledges the past but strives for a better future. As he sits there, contemplating the enormity of the change he must make, he feels a resolve solidifying within him. Jesse knows that the road ahead will be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he feels a sense of hope. Chapter 8. In the days following his epiphany, Jesse tries to resume his daily routine, but everything feels different. The streets he once patrolled with a sense of duty now seem oppressive, the familiar sights tainted by the realization of the injustice they conceal. He goes to work, performs his duties, but the internal struggle remains, a constant undercurrent that he cannot escape. His colleagues notice the change in him. Jesse is quieter, more withdrawn, and less quick to anger. They chalk it up to stress, the toll of the ongoing civil rights unrest, but Jesse knows it runs much deeper. Each encounter with protesters now feels like a test of his resolve, each arrest a reminder of the oppressive system he is part of. At home, Grace senses the shift in Jesse. Their interactions become more tender, more reflective. Jesse listens to her more, values her compassionate perspective, and seeks her counsel in ways he never did before. Their conversations, once fraught with tension, now carry an undercurrent of mutual understanding and shared concern for the future. Jesse also begins to treat the black residents of the town with more respect and empathy. He stops using derogatory language, a small but significant change. When he encounters Big Jim again, this time during a peaceful march, there is a moment of silent acknowledgement between them. Jesse doesn't interfere, a small act of defiance against the expectations of his role. These changes do not go unnoticed. Some of his colleagues question his softened stance, while others warn him of the dangers of sympathizing with the protesters. Jesse remains cautious, aware of the precarious position he is in, but determined to follow the path his conscience dictates. As the story draws to a close, Jesse stands at another protest, this time on the outskirts, observing rather than intervening. The crowd chants for justice, their voices a powerful chorus that resonates deeply within him. He feels a sense of belonging, a connection to their cause that he can no longer deny. Jesse's future is uncertain. He faces a choice: continue to evolve, to challenge the systemic racism that has defined his life and career, or retreat into the safety of his old beliefs. The ending is deliberately ambiguous, leaving his ultimate path open to interpretation. Jesse walks home at dusk, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. He passes by the town square, the site of the lynching that forever changed him. He pauses, reflecting on the journey he has undertaken, the man he has become, and the man he aspires to be. As he reaches his home, Jesse looks at the faces of his children through the window, their innocence a stark contrast to the turmoil of the world outside. He knows that his actions will shape their future, and with a deep breath, he resolves to be a better man for their sake. Jesse stepping inside, closing the door behind him.